Kate Mila Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. We are continuing our synopsis of this fabulous book, The Incredible Life and Mysterious Death of Dorothy Kilgallen, A Force of Nature, by Sara Jordan-Heintz. And this is video number 6. We are very close to almost getting to the end. A long book, dense with facts, in a gigantic knot of conspiracy, lies, deception, and facts that have been ignored, evidence that's been altered. Really, really, really a great book. And I have coming up here in the next couple of days a conversation with the author that is just absolutely fascinating. What she had to say, not what she had to say. Okay, so let's just move forward because we still have quite a bit of ground to cover in this book. So we're on chapter 11. The dogged reporter remains hounded. I love the title. September 25th, 1964. Dorothy Kilgallen got a new scoop. A witness to JFK, which I'm just going to throw out, meaning the assassination, was warned by cops and threatened with death by cops if this witness talked. There was one woman who saw a shooter, and it was not Oswald. Let's see here. Already, we're into the book again. So much. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody. This is the witness. I might get killed on the way to work. See, they kill people who know something about it. Another witness to the shooting of Officer Tippit, Mrs. Helen Markham, who identified Oswald in a police lineup, also said she had been told not to talk by several persons whom she identified as FBI and Secret Service men and 4 or 5 Dallas detectives. On November 23rd, the day after the assassination, the Dallas police obviously were rounding up as many witnesses as possible and getting them to make statements and sign affidavits while the events were still clear in their minds. One of these was Seymour Weitzman, a Dallas policeman who was one of 2 searchers to discover the alleged assassination rifle in the Texas Book Depository building from which the shots were fired. He swore under oath, quote, "This rifle was a 7.65 Mauser bolt-action equipped with a 4/13 scope, a thick black leather sling on it." Dorothy commented, "The Mauser seems to have been erased mysteriously from the case." I'm hoping that other people are going, wait a minute, Mauser? No, you heard right. As Dorothy later said, the assassination weapon is now officially an Italian Carcano of another caliber. Lee Harvey Oswald owned a Carcano, but that wasn't the gun that they originally found. So, okay. This is what I mean about evidence. You can't believe what you're hearing. Also, the Warren Commission was given a photo from the government advisor, quote, "Oswald at the window," supposedly shooting, proof that Oswald did it. And the question is, a doctored photo. The picture never surfaced. It kind of was referred to, seemed suspect, and seemed to disappear. And eventually they decided that the man in the photo was not Oswald because Oswald, how do I got on my lip? Oswald was downstairs eating in the cafeteria of the building. 2 eyewitnesses to the Tippit shooting where 2 men showed up and shot Tippit. These were not Oswald. They ran off in the opposite direction. So, sorry, my nose is starting to itch. It must be true story. Eyewitnesses saw Tippit be shot by 2 individuals working together. Neither one Oswald. The Warren Commission never looked into this information. The bullets that came out of Tippit came from 2 different sets of shells that were found at the scene. They were marked with the initials of an officer later, but later when they were looked at again, they were not marked. So these 2 shells found at the scene, these are the shells from the bullets that shot Tippit. put into evidence after the cop put his initials on the shells to say, yeah, I found these and I'm putting them in the envelope. And then later, they were different shells with no initials of the cop. Oswald's handgun that he had with him was totally different than what shot Tippit. The star witness to the Tippit shooting kept changing testimony significantly. Other witnesses testified that it wasn't Oswald, and this other one particular witness who was willing to testify under oath that it wasn't Oswald, his brother was shot 2 months later. Another witness said that it wasn't Oswald, and he was shot in the head by a sniper, just this random shooting, inside his house 2 days after a suspect was alibied by his girlfriend. His girlfriend, who was a stripper at Ruby's nightclub. Okay, she hanged herself in jail. Then the witness changed his testimony and said, oh yeah, I forgot, it was Oswald after all. Oh my God. So Ruby's girlfriend gave this eyewitness an alibi. He was shot in the head a couple of days later. She was arrested for something and hanged herself in jail. And then the other witness went, oh, okay. Kilgallen reported a change in the murder weapon of Kennedy. The first cop said a Mauser. The second cop said later it became a Carcano carbine. With the Freedom of Information Act, the public learned the CIA disputed this and affirmed that CIA wrote it down. It's in the public record. It was a Mauser. Oswald owned the Italian kind. Several cop eyewitnesses were in the depository when they found other stuff. The Sun, this is this Mauser thing, in the Sun, it became an Italian rifle. And it wasn't really capable of firing. This gun that they found was rusty and was also not a high velocity gun. And what killed Kennedy had to have certain capabilities that this gun they found didn't. In the Marines, Oswald was not trained for that type of gun and certainly not trained to shoot a moving target. And actually the training for being able to shoot a moving target in the Marines didn't start until 2011. They interviewed Oswald's gunnery sergeant who had trained him in the Marines, and he just laughed when they told him Oswald was the shooter. I guess Oswald just, no, it didn't happen. In 1976, the Dallas police chief admitted that the rifle could easily have been substituted. Also, no one proved that Oswald was in the building with a gun in his hand. The only people that saw Oswald saw him eating lunch in the cafeteria. They never found cartridges that matched an Italian carbine. They just evidence after evidence after evidence. Paraffin tests, this is where they put this kind of wax on you and they can identify if you have gunpowder on your hands from shooting a gun recently. Tests on all Oswald were negative. And his hands had a very slight trace of nitrate, which they believe was the printer's ink from handling books in the book depository, his job. The sniper's nest, it's now believed, allegedly, that this area that he set up with boxes in the window was staged by the cops as a photo op. They never found any prints of Oswald in that area. One deputy sheriff saw a guy in a station wagon whistle to a guy on the grassy knoll and pick him up. Only 2 people, they have film of this, only 2 people in the crowd on the grassy knoll area didn't move towards the site of the shooter. They were probably like me. They heard a shot. They went the opposite direction. One witness saw a guy run from behind the depository building, and we've talked about this before, it's been alluded to, and get in a station wagon and thought that he looked like Oswald. Remember, there was a guy who kind of looked like Oswald, but wasn't Oswald. Marina's landlady, Ruth Payne, had a station wagon. In her garage, they had the murder weapon and photos of Oswald with the rifle that have always, even in those days, were questioned as being, these fake. And a torn out page of a sporting goods store catalog with the gun in it. And this is all allegedly. But no one really saw the gun in the garage. And nobody, this is according to the landlady, but nobody ever saw this gun or in Oswald's hand. This is all, they think these photos, the famous photos of him standing in the yard with the gun, I think it was fake, allegedly. Ruth, the landlady, her family, and her husband all had Department of Defense CIA adjacent jobs. Files were found in her house indicating that they were CIA domestic surveillance agents. Kilgallen on TV was criticizing the Warren report again. She criticized and challenged the credibility of many issues. All these just inconsistencies that we're pointing up. And it's so confusing because witnesses will say one thing under oath and then they'll be threatened and they'll say another thing, and evidence comes and evidence goes, and overnight bullets change and rifles change and pictures might be doctored and film doctored, and it just becomes this. No wonder they've never figured this out. Anyway, she challenged the credibility of Howard Brennan, who was an eyewitness who claimed that the shooter was in the window. She questioned how his vague and inaccurate description could even give Tippett a reason to stop Oswald, to go after. How would he recognize him? I mean, come on. If he saw somebody, it was a vague at a distance. Also, this Brennan guy failed to pick Oswald out of a lineup. He couldn't recognize him. J. Edgar, agreed with Kilgallen. He did not believe that the Warren report was accurate. The police chief also disagreed with this witness. This is the Dallas police chief. Why was Oswald so quickly a suspect? It was like he was a suspect within the first 20 minutes. It's unbelievable. A cop went to arrest him before any description of him or name of him had gone out onto the airwaves or the police communication. Oswald was found in the lunchroom, the cafeteria place of the, I call it the cafeteria. Probably it was just a room that they ate in. Eating his lunch, calm, not out of breath. 90 seconds after the shots. 90 seconds. He was on the first floor. So he came down 5 floors from the 6th floor. And he was on the first floor in the lunchroom in the middle of eating his lunch with eyewitnesses. And the cop that did come into the building, I mean, they didn't cordon off the building, but a cop did come in. And he let Oswald go. There was nothing suspicious about him. Fellow employees came rushing down the stairs from above to see what was going on. And Oswald wasn't on the stairs with them. He was in the middle of eating in the lunchroom. The cop saw this, and he saw the group coming down, and he saw that Oswald was in this room eating, and the group was coming down over here. Never the twain shall meet. And he testified to this, that it was not Oswald who came from downstairs. But here's the big question. Why doesn't the media, even today, show more interest in these contradictions? They're mind-blowing. They're driving me crazy. So I don't understand. But that's the question in the book, too. Oswald later was able to describe exactly who was in the lunchroom with him, who came down the stairs while he was in the lunchroom. He was seen by multiple witnesses calmly eating lunch. Oh, he was on the 2nd floor. They came down from the 5th or 6th floor, just to be accurate. He was on the second floor at the time of the shots. The Warren Commission never interviewed any of these witnesses. Here again, it's saying the sixth floor. So, okay, well, it's just high up. It was really busy. They were getting a new flooring put in. So how would an assassin have set up secretly with all these workmen up there milling about laying a new floor? Workers that were doing the floor up there stayed up there and ate lunch up there during their lunch break. They saw nobody in the window. Oswald left the building after the shooting, after his lunchroom encounter with the cop. He left, but business shut down for the day. Lots of the employees left. They took the opportunity, go home. An affidavit was found in a secret Dallas Police Department file of an 18-year-old employee who did see an old man. Now, this is an 18-year-old, so the old man was probably 30. I'm just kidding. Saw an old man who was a stranger on the floor, the sixth floor, where the shooter allegedly came from. And he didn't see anybody else up there except the guys working on the floor. He didn't see Oswald. That's the point. After speaking with the FBI, he changed his testimony. 10 minutes after the shots, this guy got into a black car. They saw him leaving. Railroad workers saw a guy in similar clothing. So first he was at the book depository, then he was seen down by the railroad tracks, talking into a microphone or a telephone in an area of the railroad parking lot. This railroad worker who testified to this got death threats, and he died in 1966 after being run off the road by a black car. Kilgallen publicly criticized the lax Dallas Police Department headquarters security the day that Oswald was shot. Officially, the story is that this was on impulse by Ruby, that he just acted on impulse, emotional. There had been threats in the voice of Ruby, allegedly trying to avoid the shooting of Oswald is the question. So here's the situation. Ruby shows up to do this job, right? They want to claim it was an impulse, but it's very odd that he managed to get through security and into the building, surrounded by security, but none inside, none around Oswald. Get that clear. Ruby's just wandering around willy-nilly, So, he wasn't emotional and acting on an impulse, so that kind of gets paid to that excuse. But the police department had been receiving threats on the phone. Oh, we're going to get Oswald. In Ruby's voice, because people heard the recordings. And the question begs to be asked, was Ruby trying to create a safer environment so he could not himself get to Oswald? Was he a reluctant assassin? Hoover tried to get Oswald moved secretly at night. Hoover intervened on I guess it would have been late Friday night, early Saturday morning, and tried to get Oswald moved while nobody was around, and they wouldn't do it. Captain Fritz of, the Dallas Police Department said no, and he kept delaying the transfer. Delaying into the morning, and the question is, what was he waiting for? Ruby? Fritz was a close friend with Ruby, and he rejected all efforts to create security around Oswald and in the car park that they were in. An attorney in Dallas claimed that Fritz arranged to have Oswald shot to be able to claim a solve in a big case. This is alleged. This is what an attorney in Dallas said at the time. Ruby was well known to the cops. He practically lived at the station, is how it's described. He hired off-duty cops to be bouncers in his club. And in return, they were allowed to stay and drink for free, have access to the women who worked there, and stay after hours. The sergeant who was responsible for the basement security questions are asked, was he also complicit? He was a big friend of mobsters, and he failed a lie detector test after this. Ruby's lawyer was a mob lawyer, and in the headquarters that morning, just how convincing, how convenient. My lawyer just happens to be down the hall. Did he assure Ruby that he'd get him off? As you'll know, when I talked to Sara, the implication was that Ruby was promised quite a bit, and one of the things he was promised is, oh, this case will go nowhere. You're certainly not going to get the death penalty. His lawyer called him an enraged patriot. Where have we heard that word before recently? Ruby ate with mobsters the night before in a guy called Campisi was one of the mobsters. He visited the jail when Ruby was incarcerated. He often visited Ruby. The third highest guy in the Department of Justice shut down an investigation of Ruby's association with the mob and Cuba. Hoover, at this point, was seething. He claimed there was a conspiracy. He tried to shut down the Dallas Police Department. No, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Hoover claimed that somebody tried to shut down the Dallas Police Department's story, to shut them up. They really wanted Oswald to be the lone gunman. There was a cry for Robert Kennedy Sr. I keep doing that. The father. To investigate. He was the Attorney General. And this would have been awkward because it would have implicated LBJ. So it never happened. Hoover allegedly hated the CIA and implicated them. Hoover was kind of confusing and inconsistent himself. He did challenge the autopsy. He did challenge the Warren Commission. But then he said the FBI bungled the case in private documents. So you get the impression that he had no control over what was going on. He censured or put on probation 17 agents in December of '63, saying, "We failed," meaning the FBI. He took responsibility for the FBI not doing enough security. He said the FBI was monitoring Oswald all this time before this event, the assassination event. Oswald had been monitored for other reasons. Oswald was up to no good. He was not an innocent baby. He had CIA connections. There's strong reason to suspect he may have been an agent, in intelligence, and he was being surveilled, monitored by the FBI. And they saw nothing suspicious about him leading up to the assassination. And then Hoover said, and I quote, "LBJ consorts with hoodlums," end quote. J. Edgar Hoover. So then we talk again about Pataki, the new boyfriend, the gigolo boyfriend of Kilgallen, of whom she was quite enamored. He claimed that he helped Kilgallen with her Warren Commission articles. And she was under FBI scrutiny. They wanted to use her to get to her source to find out more truth about the assassination, because Hoover, who agreed with Kilgallen, wanted to unveil all the truth, and he figured if she has a source, we need to know who it is. The Warren Report went public September of '64. It said that Oswald acted alone. There were 3 shots only, and they came from behind in the depository building. There was no conspiracy, and Ruby acted out of emotion. It was an impulse. It was spontaneous. This report was called comprehensive by Life and New York Times, Life magazine, New York Times newspaper. They both said that the report destroyed conspiracy theories. In 1967, I wrote 2 dates one on top of the other. It's got to be, maybe it's 65. You can look it up. It's really irrelevant. It's just a long event in a string of unbelievable stuff. A book came out called Accessories After the Fact by Sylvia Meager. I'm sure she thinks it's important when it came out, and my apologies. But she was a WHO researcher, World Health Organization, and she compiled, she was so upset about the Warren Commission report. I bet it was 65 because they came out in September of 64. So she published this Accessory After the Fact, which compiled a subject index for researchers because she was appalled by the Warren report and called it a cover-up. So she tried to collate all this information to make sense of it. Kilgallen said she smelled something fishy, and it challenged the history of the event, the Warren report did. She stopped writing about it publicly until one more time right before her death. She was saving it for the book she was trying to research. She was saving her talks with Ruby for the book. She had one on Ruby, and she thought she would do a completely second one entirely on the assassination, but we don't know because all of her notes disappeared, her files disappeared. And the information we have about them comes from Pataki, who is not trustworthy. Pataki revealed that he met on several occasions with at least two major figures investigating the assassination. Why? Was he monitoring her? Was he keeping an eye on her research, her probe? The Warren report was full of weirdness, and there's so much in this book that I left out of this synopsis because we would be here all day. So my apologies to Sara, which I already gave her. And she agrees. It's insane. There's just so much information. It's hard to keep track of. But, sorry, I'm getting the hiccups. Anybody who's interested, this is a fabulous book. Really well researched. So the Warren report is full of weirdness, full of violence too. There's the magic bullet that, shot Kennedy, shot the governor. It just was weird. The number of shots, the direction of the shots, lots of evidence, lots of eyewitnesses, who all kind of agreed originally anyway. Some of them changed their testimony, but originally many eyewitnesses and evidence that supported their reports that there were 7 shots minimum from at least 3 directions. The wound trajectories were not the same in the hospital as described by many doctors and medical personnel as what the Warren Commission said. And the great forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht, who I think recently died, if I'm not mistaken, agreed that the Warren Commission report was nuts. They found different shells, remember, not the Mauser that was found, shells for a carbine, what the heck. Suspects were arrested as communication to shooters from nearby buildings went on. There's evidence of that. And the nearby buildings were not the depository. And these people that were arrested and then let go, they had links to the mafia. One had 12 wives in his life, just a little bit of gossip. And after the assassination, this guy came into a huge amount of money because they did investigate some of them, but then they kind of just let it go. This guy actually checked in with the Dallas office of the U.S. probation and said that he was in Dallas to meet with the son of H.L. Hunt, an oil guy. So he was in legal trouble. He had to report to the Dallas probation office, federal U.S. probation office in Dallas, and he did. And his excuse for being in Dallas, because he's on probation, was that he was there to meet the son of H.L. Hunt. Then he was found in a building close to the depository and was actually arrested for a while and then let go. Jack Ruby visited this guy's hotel the night before the assassination. Reagan blocked this witness extradition to Louisiana to be subpoenaed by DA Jim Garrison about Ruby. Reagan got involved. There was alleged CIA activity from that building. I just can't keep track. Zapruder, okay, here we go. I never knew this. I was shocked by this. I wish I had talked to Sara more about this, but I mean, we talked for ages, and there's just too much. Zapruder worked with Mohrenscheld, now with his wife. Now, Mohrenscheld, his wife, was in the CIA. They were friends of Oswald, which is really weird because, completely different demographic. Let's just put it that way to be nice. Zapruder also worked with George H.W. Bush, H.L. Hunt, the oil man, and others. 2 Hunts involved in this. I mean, it's hard to keep track. There's E. Howard Hunt, who was on the ground, ostensibly, allegedly, who knows what is true and not true in this case, but supposedly he was there that day in Dallas, involved in some regard. Then there's H.L. Hunt, the oil man, who was pals with LBJ, and the building was owned by a company he was part owner of, and Anyway, was it just a coincidence that Zapruder just happened to be there filming at the perfect location and had a clear view of what happened, having been associated with this woman in the CIA, she and her husband being pals with Oswald, and George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, and H.L. Hunt. Zapruder was connected to these people. The cement riser that he was beside was marked with a yellow stripe. It was a fresh yellow stripe. It had been painted the day before. And speculation is this was his sign, stand here. Kilgallen thought that she called Gerald Ford a dolt. Ford was instrumental in rewording reports on the bullet wounds to fit the one shooter from behind theory. That great forensic pathologist, Gerald Ford. This helped establish a fake trajectory and ended any claims that there were multiple shooters or that there were any in the front. This is the foundation of the Warren Report. The magic bullet came out Kennedy's neck and into Connolly. That story. Zapruder's film shows Connolly was not shot in the sequence that the Warren Report says. Now, what people eventually saw on TV was a doctored version. Just put that out there. Pretty certain it was a doctored version, and it did not conform to the original Parkland Hospital doctors, surgeons, medical school teachers who all saw the wounds and were familiar with bullet wounds. So the film shows Connolly was not shot in the sequence the Warren Report says, and he was still holding his hat, and he was shot in the wrist. He would not have been holding his hat. The headshot had to come from the south of the overpass, or the south from the grassy knoll area, just doing the physics of where that shot was in the body. Was the activity that happened on the north side of the picket fence a distraction? This is interesting speculation. The shooter was at the overpass in that tunnel area, and on the other side of the road, the grassy knoll and the fence, there was activity. Was that to let this other guy run? Some say a firecracker was used as a distraction, as a first distraction. 6 Secret Service agents testified that first shot was not a gunshot, it was a firecracker. The Warren investigation didn't use standard uniform processes for trajectory analysis. They did not study them the way that you would in, say, a shooting on a street in a city, just ordinary, a typical shooting. The book talks about the physics of the shot, and I wrote, ugh, because it was so much. But if you're interested in this, it's persuasive. Many cops and other agents reported the sounds of shots that were different, too close together, more than was reported by the Warren Commission. I mean, it's just complete and utter inconsistency with evidence and eyewitnesses and physics. One can take the measure of a man by noting that Gerald Ford voted against federal aid for education and housing, repeatedly resisted increases in the minimum wage, tried to block medical care for the elderly, consistently fought against measures to combat pollution, and later opposed the Freedom of Information Act. He had so little regard for truth, he unconscionably went around the country making money by giving lectures about Lee Harvey Oswald, a man who Ford described as that kill-crazy communist. Ford contended Oswald killed Kennedy to prove his manhood in the eyes of his wife, Marina, because he was supposedly impotent. This is Gerald Ford saying this. This was just Ford's trash talk and belied by the fact that Lee and Marina had 2 children, including a daughter who was 33 days old on November 22nd. I always, even as a child, was so sympathetic for Marina Oswald sitting in that gravesite with this new baby. And then after I had kids, I was like, I just can't imagine, when you're postpartum, you're just like one big gigantic weep fest. And I just, oh my God, what a horrible situation. Nobody in the Secret Service was disciplined for failure to protect Kennedy. The book describes the inaction of various agents on the scene. Now, keep in mind that might sound contradictory, because they did talk about a number of agents that were chastised, but they were local, I think. So, you've got Washington, D.C. bosses, and then you've got the local office bosses. So what one guy did, the other guy may not have done the same thing. And then the book goes on to describe the inaction of various agents on the scene at the day, including after the first shot, the car slowed down to lower than 5 miles an hour, almost came to a complete standstill. That is not how they're trained. The driver, a guy called Shipman, was known to not like Kennedy, but Kennedy's trusted driver died suddenly and unexplainedly in mid-October of 1963. He ate something, he felt sick, and he died in his sleep. I don't know if it was pursued, but that's bizarre. There was no autopsy, so it was not pursued. Next line, no autopsy. His wife was told by the president's doctor to bury him quickly. He had been scheduled to be the driver in Dallas. He had dinner with his sister-in-law, and he had told her this. September of 1923, Paul Landis, a Secret Service guy, admits finding a bullet in the back seat of the limo where Kennedy was put in on the stretcher. So they get to Parkland. Kennedy's in the limo. They move him onto a stretcher. Paul Landis found a bullet in the back seat later, after Kennedy's body was carried in. He didn't know what to do with the bullet. So he went into the emergency room where Kennedy was on the stretcher and put the bullet on the stretcher to keep the evidence with the body. But it disappeared. And therefore, evidence of another shooter, was spirited away. When he was just 29, he quit the Secret Service because he said it was too traumatic. And he was even unable to read anything about it until about 2014. He told Clint Hill in 2014, and Hill told him to say nothing or there would be ramifications. 2014. The magic bullet was pristine. It went on all over the place, shot a couple of people, took turns, made turns that seemed were impossible. But it was pristine, and it should have been deformed by going through people's bodies. Landis? Never interviewed. Governor Connolly did not believe that Oswald did it. This is interesting. Asked in 1982 if he thought Oswald fired the gun, the governor replied, "Absolutely not. I do not for 1 second believe the conclusions of the Warren Commission." Asked why he didn't talk about it before, speak out about it, he said, "Because I love this country and we needed closure at that time. I will never speak out publicly about what I believe." Yikes. Kilgallen mentioned quite a bit in her column about witness intimidation. So chapter 12, Dorothy's final year alive. Kilgallen went to LBJ's inauguration in 1965, and she was like a fashion plate. Johnny Carson and Woody Allen both joked at the gala and made jokes that were off color, and they got nasty. She actually was a big supporter of Lenny Bruce. And just an interesting aside about how these books synchronistically often have things to do with each other, and the videos here often have related things. Lenny Bruce had a lawyer called Ephraim London. Ephraim London is Harriet Fraud, Dr. Harriet Fraud, who's come on here a number of times and discussed topics. The psychotherapist from Manhattan, grandmother of the women's movement in the 60s. Her uncle was Lenny Bruce's lawyer. Anyway, Kilgallen supported Lenny Bruce. She said that his use of language was singled out when she said she heard the same language on and off Broadway all the time. She testified for him at his trial. Dorothy Kilgallen did. She called him a brilliant satirist and social commentator. She vehemently opposed censorship and suppression of information by the government. She told friends that she'd never vote for president again after the assassination. She praised Jackie, who did not go to LBJ's inauguration. Kennedy had a back channel linked to Russia for diplomacy. RFK and Jackie told the Russians that Kennedy's death was a large political conspiracy. They told the Russian link that LBJ was out of his depth, that he didn't know what he was doing as president, and McGeorge Bundy was running the country. JFK, his death, getting hiccups again, sorry. JFK's death was a terrible mistake for LBJ, as it had ties to corrupt business and would influence his policy agenda going forward. So it didn't work out the way that maybe people had hoped it might work out. Robert Kennedy and Jackie warned the Russians to wait, that LBJ would strain relations, but RFK was going to run for governor of Massachusetts and then run for president to implement Kennedy's peace plans with Russia. Kennedy had back channels to Russia and had a vision of making peace with them in the early 60s. February of 65, Kilgallen's hairdresser said that Kilgallen's daughter confronted her about her affair with Pataki. Hairdresser said that the daughter was embarrassed, told her mother she was embarrassed about this relationship. Kilgallen told the hairdresser that her daughter knew what was up with her dad, the relationship between her parents. Kilgallen broke her arm in March of 65, and she celebrated her 25th anniversary in the hospital. I think that broken arm is significant, and I'm not implying violence because I don't think that's what it's an indication of, and I hope I remember to talk about it again because this thought occurred to me. I'm not necessarily sure I wrote it down in my notes. Anyway, she did columns about Giancana and his ties with Castro, the mob guy with Castro. She did lavish parties in her lavish 5-story apartment. She made a trip to Ireland. She did several radio and TV appearances. She wanted to discuss the Kennedy assassination, but she didn't write much about it anymore. And the question is asked did Hearst tell her to back off? She had approximately, this is interesting, $100,000 worth of jewels that she went to Switzerland and put in a bank box, a security box. And questions were asked, did she also put research about the Kennedy assassination in this Swiss bank? But here's an interesting thing to think about, because later they opened it and they found the jewels, but there was no research. LBJ had a mistress, Madeline Brown. She told a reporter that he told her, LBJ told Madeline Brown that Kennedy was going to die. She got pregnant by LBJ, allegedly, had a paternity test done, and put evidence of it in a Swiss bank account. Not the same bank box. It went missing. Now, ostensibly, no one's supposed to be able to get in there. Who could get into a Swiss bank account that wasn't the person that owned the box? What page am I on here? So this is what the book says. She spoke with the vice president on the morning of the assassination. So she spoke to LBJ the morning Kennedy was killed. She said LBJ was cussing the Irish mafia SOBs, meaning the Kennedys and their friends, and said after today they would never embarrass him again. I saw him next on New Year's Eve of '63 after he had become president, and at that time I told him, I've got to put my mind at rest. People in Dallas are talking that you were responsible for the assassination. She stated this conversation took place when she and Johnson rendezvoused at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas, in room number 254. Even today, the hotel calls that the LBJ room. Madeline Brown, the girlfriend, said, LBJ told me at the time it was the oil people that I knew, meaning the oil people that he knew, and the CIA. And the CIA connection was through the Dallas mayor, Earl Cable, whose brother Charles Cable was the number 2 man under Allen Dulles. Kennedy had fired them both. Brown recalled that Johnson was over the CIA during the time that he was vice president, like in charge. He called it the invisible government. Wow. So she was right about Dallas mayor in '63, Earl Cable, and we know she was right because in 2017 documents were declassified that proved he was a secret CIA asset. LBJ never felt guilty. Quote, I've done what I've got to do. She claims LBJ was manic depressive, bipolar. And she wrote a book, Texas in the Morning. And used copies today are over $1,000. Kilgallen's last column publicly on JFK was September of '65. She challenged the picture of Oswald with the rifle. She challenged Maria's complicity in IDing the photos. She felt like she was forced to ID them. Oswald always said that the photo was a fake. That's not me in that photo. In '92 in Dallas, practice negatives were found, doctoring this picture to create it. They had used techniques to remove parts and add parts. This is before Photoshop, So the book goes into an awful lot of detail about how this happened, how this early technology was used to fake these pictures of Oswald. And I didn't write it all down because it was very involved. Implications that the camera was a spy camera, the pictures were faked, and they were not available to the public in 1963. So there was no way for people to be, really looking at them. Kilgallen told People that Kennedy was the story of a lifetime, and she would prove who did it. In October, she had planned to go to New Orleans to meet a source. If it's the last thing I do, she was quoted as saying, I'm going to break this case. She flew to Vegas on October 7th to meet with Johnny Ray. Likely, she stopped in New Orleans on her way home. We'll never know. She invited her hairdresser to come as her escort and called his hotel the morning after their dinner together. I guess with Johnny Ray. Hang on a second. Maybe it was dinner with the hairdresser. She asked me if I could go with her. She didn't tell me where. I said yes. She told me how I was to travel, where I was to go, what I was to do. I'd never been to New Orleans before, so I didn't know anything about it. We didn't even travel on the same plane together. I went directly to my hotel. We talked on the phone, hairdresser and Kilgallen, and then I went over to her hotel and had dinner. Okay, he's the one who had dinner with her. Then I went back to my hotel. The next morning, I was supposed to do her hair and makeup. She called me at my hotel, and she said, I want you to go to the airport. I left a ticket for you, and I want you to go immediately back to New York. Never tell anyone that you came to New Orleans with me, and don't ask me any more questions. And I said, okay, and I left. I did not do her hair. She stayed in New Orleans. What spooked her? She was protective of her friends. She was protective of her hairdressers, and she told them before, I'm not going to tell you anything more because people are dying. Let's see here. I'm kind of under the clock. Okay, I'm going to stop based on time and not chapter because this is a really long chapter. So it's very likely that she did stop. Well, we knew she stopped in New Orleans because there's airline tickets that he went from New Orleans back home. Was she meeting a mob contact boss or friend of Frank Costello? Costello had bootlegged and advised Joe Kennedy. Kilgallen suspected the LBJ and the government, not the mob, was involved, but she knew the mob had lots of information on the government. Pataki said that she met with Jim Garrison, the DA, who I heard speak at my university. In 1967, he did his own investigation into JFK. Garrison had looked at the local mob in New Orleans. Lots of Cubans with CIA connections. In 1965, Garrison was told by Senator Russell Long and Hale Boggs, formerly of the Warren Commission, that it was a conspiracy. Boggs harbored doubts long after the report came out, and he died in a plane crash in 1972. The wreckage was never found. Rumor was, allegedly, it was a bomb that was planted on the plane. In 1971, he had made, this is Boggs, had made a speech on the floor of the House, quote, over the post-war years, we've granted to the elite and secret police within our system vast new powers over the lives and liberties of the people. At the request of the trusted and respected heads of those forces and their appeal to the necessities of national security, we have exempted those grants of power from due accounting and strict surveillance. In response to this, Gerald Ford told President Nixon, there's two examples of honesty for you, that he thought Boggs was either drinking too much or taking pills. Boggs was the father of the late Cokie Roberts, a political analyst and journalist for PBS and ABC, who was a founding mother of NPR, who died in 2019. And I'm going to end this particular video here because I have an appointment. And I will be back to finish the job, the coverage, And it may be a little bit longer video, the last video. So this is the end of video number 6. And I will be back, and thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy it, and keep your eye open because I will be uploading in the next couple of days at the end of this book here, a conversation with the author, which was epic. So, Slán go fóill. Slánte.